We are joined now, as we are every Wednesday at this time, by Carleton University political science professor Elliot Tepper, who looks at all the events that are happening in the world and puts them into a Canadian context for us every week. Elliot, good morning.
Good morning, Mark.
We have lots to talk about. We're going to get to American politics coming up, maybe even some British politics. There was the Queen's speech this morning, and fascinating time in the UK right now. But let's start with some of the global hotspots.
Yes.
And these are connected to American politics in many ways, because the way you put it to me in an email was very much that other countries are testing the United States and testing Donald Trump.
Indeed. You know, on a summer solstice day, you and I are talking about world politics, which is never sunny ways. It's always gloom and doom in one form or another. So it's very interesting if there was a doomsday clock equivalent, just talking about tensions, possibilities of war as opposed to nuclear war. I'm afraid the message today is it just ticked up a bit. We see some testing indeed of American but also Canadian and Western resolve in two widely different theaters. Let's talk first about North Korea and East Asia. North Korea, as we know, is always a potential hotspot in the world for all the reasons with which we're familiar. Now, what's happened is that America is being tested because a young student was arrested in North Korea, American student, and he's been sent home comatose, and now he's died. What does this do? This adds another layer of pressure on Donald Trump to deliver on his red line. He has said, under my watch, North Korea is not going to become a threat to the homeland, and the era of strategic patience, that is Obama, is over. Well, it's a red line, but it's ambiguous. We don't know quite where it's drawn, and we don't know what the consequences would be. But what we do know is that now there's a whole layer of extra pressure on Donald Trump because an American apparently has been murdered by the North Koreans in jail, a totally innocent young boy. His parents are in the news. What will Donald Trump do in response? And it's not just that. He's also said, well, it's very nice that China tried, but they failed. They just couldn't deliver. Well, if that's his main strategy, as others are pointing out, if his main strategy on North Korea is to have China deliver, to intervene and moderate the behavior of North Korea, that strategy, if that was the only strategy, has failed. What's left? Military options? Are there any diplomatic? We've talked over and over again that the military options regarding North Korea are very slim. You can't really do much as long as Seoul, the capital, is under threat from conventional artillery from the north. Anything that's done that could lead to a spark in North Korea could lead to disaster. And now the ball is clearly in Donald Trump's court.
You mentioned the doomsday clock. And,
yes.
And I just looked it up again. It is at 2.5 minutes to midnight as of a few months ago.
That's correct.
And that is the closest that it has been to midnight since 1960. So we're going back to the Cold War and to before the Bay of Pigs, for example, and the Cuban Missile Crisis and so on. So that's pretty stark. Now, that's just one group of people's opinion. It's not a real measure of anything.
It's other pretty than well-informed people, however.
Yeah. So do you agree with that?
Well, my comment was those calculations are only made periodically. If we had a day-to-day barometer, this is where I enter today. Right. We had a day-to-day barometer on our tensions going up that could lead to something really serious and bad, or they're going down. They just went up. And they just went up because of, apparently, America being sorely tested by North Korea with no real viable option on the table. So we'll have to see now how Donald Trump, having been challenged, can possibly deliver. There is a diplomatic opening, we hope. South Korea has said, we don't like having only a military option. Let's go back to a sunshine policy, be nice to the North. But it's very hard for them to say that, given the bellicosity coming out of the North and the lack of Chinese leadership apparently able to do anything about it. So in that theater of operation, tensions have gone up.
Let's talk next about how Russia is testing the United States.
Indeed. So let's switch over. Now, on one theater, we're talking about East Asia. Remember, there's Japan and South Korea, and, Taiwan is there as well. But on the other side...
And let's not forget China was going to take care of North Korea,
yes,
right? That's what Donald Trump said.
Yes.
Until he had it...
But he apparently just shrugged just now and said, oh, well, they tried, too bad.
Yeah.
I think the ball is still in China's court, and what can they in fact do? Their options may also be somewhat limited.
Yeah.
But they may also like having this pawn of theirs, and this is one of the things. Can they ever change their own reckoning of their national security interests or not? And there's no sign they're changing, and therefore there's no sign of change in the equation in North Korea, South Korea. So that dynamic is always tense, and it just went up a notch. On the other side, Canadian troops have just landed in Latvia. Canada, you and I were talking before, Canada is putting its troops in harm's way to save the free world, if you want to be grandiose about it. NATO is bulking up along the edges of the Russian perimeter in the Baltics because of increased, enhanced, and I would say irresponsible behavior to some degree by the Russians in the Baltic theater. So we have just sent a battle group of 400 to Latvia. Germany and other NATO countries are beefing up their support in Lithuania and Poland. But people don't mention Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is a Soviet oblast, a province, but it's really a salient just above where our troops are and where all those other NATO troops are. It is Soviets, Russian. Soviets got it at the end of the Second World War. Now it's Russian. They are heavily militarized. They have missiles, and they say they're now nuclear-capable missiles within easy range of where the Canadian soldiers are currently on the ground and where there's going to be increasing NATO presence. There has been increasing tension all along the Baltics for quite some time. Russia flies their planes there, turning off their transponders. They do it off our coast as well sometimes. You don't know where the Russian planes are. This is reckless behavior, and it's provocative, and it's threatening. We just heard a talk saying that the Russians, unannounced, will do an exercise moving 100,000 troops in 24 hours as a military exercise in that border area. So we know that Russia is testing America and testing Canada, testing NATO with these actions. Would they actually go to war? These have been Soviet-occupied and Russian territory in their view for some time, and Kaliningrad certainly has been. They took it from the Germans after 700 years of German occupation. It's not the only arena. What about Syria? We have in the case of Syria, the Russians are very clearly waving off America. Now, what's going to happen? What happened there in brief was that America shot down, as part of the coalition, which we are part of. Our planes are there in Iraq, on the Iraqi side. The Americans shot down a Syrian government jet that was bombing very near American allied positions, the people that we support on the ground, America supports on the ground. And America actually shot down a Syrian plane, and the Russians answered, "You can't do that. If you keep doing that, we're going to start shooting you down." And the Americans also shot down a drone, which was an Iranian drone. And the Russians again responded, waving off America, saying, if you do this again, we're going to shoot you down. Now, the last time this happened was when the Trump administration got a lot of kudos for actually firing some missiles into Syria. You remember that? And yet the Russians then responded very strongly, saying, you are never going to do that again. And Donald Trump basically said, you're right, and he turned his back away from that theater of operations. So all across the region, America's resolve, NATO's resolve, Canada's resolve by definition, and we're part of all that, is being tested. And I think the climate has gone up. They've one more notch upward on the tension meter.
Let's talk about the United Kingdom for a moment.
Sure.
The Queen delivered her 63rd Queen's Speech,
yes.
which is remarkable.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Yes.
She's only missed delivering the speech to open a session of Parliament twice when she was pregnant in 1959 and 1963. So she's done it every other time, 63 times. And clearly it was a chastened message, a watered-down message compared to the rhetoric of the election campaign from the Conservatives. And, of course, the question people are asking is, how long will Theresa May last? How long will this government last?
The Queen delivered in a somber dress as well as a somber message. It's a bizarre situation. This is the equivalent of the speech from the throne, our speech from the throne. The opposition has said, we don't think this government has the confidence of the House, and we are prepared to challenge it on the basis of the speech. And the government, meanwhile, has postponed by 2 days the delivery in order to get together a working majority by forming with the Northern Ireland Party, the DUP. And that deal has not yet been consummated. In turn, it gets very complicated very quickly and very ominous, because if you deal with the DUP, the Northern Ireland Party, what does it do to the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which becomes now in the future, very soon, the border between the EU and the UK. So a lot of things riding on this. What hasn't been noticed, Mark, is if Jeremy Corbyn says, okay, I'll go for it now, and he can't make a majority, they only have 2 weeks after the speech from the Queen, or if no majority is presented by either side, Britain goes to the polls.
Wow. Just imagine another election.
With Jeremy Corbyn ahead now 6 points in the polls.
Yeah. Coming up, we'll talk about the latest developments in Donald Trump's America. Elliot Tepper is with us every Wednesday on Ottawa Today. Carleton University political science professor Elliot Tepper is with us every Wednesday on Ottawa Today. You wanted to make one more comment about
just to maybe tie some threads together as well. The implications of the speech by the Queen is that the British government, the UK government, is going to focus on Brexit and very little else. Remember, what we're talking about now is a very weakened UK entering into a more united EU. Discussions about the future of the EU itself and its relationship with the UK. All of this means that there's some signs of rejuvenation and strengthening on the continent within the EU. Now, keeping in mind, the EU is not only a partner of ours, but also it's been a pillar of the peace and prosperity that we have enjoyed for so long. And Russia, meanwhile, is testing that repeatedly. And this can link to our next story. Russia is playing an active role, not only in perhaps sliming our soldiers through false information when they go to Latvia, as they've already done to the Germans, but also they've been trying to interfere with the EU's increasing signs of revitalization. And that takes us back to now what's going to happen to them in Brexit, but also what about Russia testing America by, in the last election, after all, interfering very specifically, proven 39 states in addition to, so we're talking now about, we're moving into Trump world and what's going to happen as the American president is increasingly beleaguered by investigations starting with Russian interference in the election and then expanding outward.
So before we do that, we should mention another possible link, which is the Queen typically in her Queen's speech mentions upcoming state visits, and she did not mention Donald Trump, even though there had been talk that he would sometime this year go to the United Kingdom for a state visit. And there had been rumors that maybe Trump was saying, I'm less interested in that. There could be a lot of protests. I don't want that. So it appears that's being pushed back.
Yes, it's just one minor offshoot of the shambolic Trump administration, a trip to visit the Queen, which is what he wanted. He wanted to meet the Queen. Apparently that may be postponed into the dim future.
All right. So let's turn to what's happening in the White House. And one of the things that I think arises out of yesterday is that even though the result was close, 51.9% to 48.1%, it proves, I think, the Georgia congressional district vote where so much money was spent proves that it's going to be harder than a lot of Democrats might think it's going to be to take seats away from the Republicans in the midterms.
That's exactly where we ended our talk last week. Don't bet against the Republicans in the midterms and count on even the normal 30-seat swing when one party's in power, and they only have 27, so if they get 30 lost, the Democrats would come in. Don't count on any of that. Now, it has been pointed out that this district was won by, 30 points by every Republican who's been running for a very long time. And it's also pointed out by a Republican analyst that when you have a candidate who worked for Al Jazeera and does not live in the district, that wasn't an ideal candidate to put up to unseat the Republicans in that district. It was close, so both sides can say, oh, well, we made our point. And yes, a win is a win, and the Republicans have not had a major loss yet. Are they about to have one? We should probably turn to, so many aspects of this.
Yeah.
What about the investigations? The investigations are going forward. There's testimony. One of the things that you and I have talked about, and I've been watching for, is when will an investigation into conflict of interest emerge? Because right from the day when you and I were on air together during Trump's announcement of what he's going to do with his money, he's not going to sell everything. He's going to keep control of his empire through his children. The possibility of conflict of interest, not just with Donald Trump, but with just about everybody around him, starting with his children and son-in-law, that if the investigation opens up on that front, and the report is that Mueller is bulking up on people who are experts in tax and financial fraud, that could be another whole dimension to what is an ever-expanding investigation. Whether collusion is ever proven, whether obstruction of justice is ever proven, both of those are hard. Not impossible, but if conflict of interest then comes up, it could then be damaging and fatal. But we'll have to see. Meanwhile, another point you and I have been emphasizing over and over again, well, everybody's riveted by the circus. The Republican agenda is going forward.
Right. And
that has been happening. And now, by the way, that's getting more and more press coverage. So once again, I think the Mark Sutcliffe show is being monitored carefully because it's coming to the fore now that the Republicans, in fact, the Republican ascendancy, as I've called it here, is working its way through. It's been stalled in big ticket items. And that's what everybody focused on, tax reform and the repeal of Obamacare. And maybe building the wall. These things have been stalled a bit, but everything else is moving ahead nicely. The deregulation, the freeing up of Wall Street, et cetera, which is fine for the Republicans if you like that. And if you don't like that, a lot of ammunition is being given to the Democrats. What about now the bigger ticket items? And they're related. The health care bill, actually, according to keen analysts, is really a tax reform bill, part one, because there's a lot of tax implications in it for basically reducing taxes on the wealthy and passing it on to everybody else. So they need that in order to get on to the major tax reform, which they also have. And now the Republicans are doing something extraordinary. In the Senate, they're saying, well, we didn't like anything the House did, and the House passed a bill successfully, and the Republican celebrated that. The president did, and then later he said, no, I didn't like that bill. It was mean. Now they're saying, well, maybe the Senate is so conflicted themselves among the Republicans, they can't do any better than what happened in the House. So, and it was mean, and they might get even meaner. We'll have to see how it works out. July 4th, after negotiating secretly, writing a bill secretly, unprecedented, no hearings on this whatsoever, the Republicans with the majority hope to ram through, repeal, and replace Obamacare.
Let's talk about Wag the Dog for a moment.
Indeed.
The 20-year-old movie directed by Barry Levinson, starring Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman, in which a president or a White House administration that's trying to avoid a scandal declares war, creates a fake war on Albania. And you asked me in your email to me yesterday, should we be concerned that Trump will seek a foreign war as a diversion from domestic difficulties?
Yeah, don't forget, Willie Nelson was in that movie, too.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember that. Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
It was a great movie.
Yeah.
Yes. One of the possibilities when any president is beleaguered, and this president is increasingly beleaguered, is to have a distraction and do a rally around the flag and, wag the dog, rally around the flag. And with all the possibilities for picking a confrontation, there's always the possibility that why don't we have a nice little war someplace? And the possibility of, say, on Iran, for example, many, many areas where I'm concerned, Mark, that on the day of the summer solstice, we should maybe take some solace that none of these possibilities could happen. But we have to lay them on the table as possibilities. There's nothing like rallying around the flag. All right, you slapped Cuba around. All of this is part of repealing anything Obama did. The Republicans are doing that all across the board. But what about Iran? What about the situations now in Qatar? Many possibilities where a nice little war could be conceptualized as a diversion. But how do you keep it little?
All right, we'll have to stop there. Elliot, thank you. We'll talk to you perhaps next week where your schedule is still being sorted out, but we'll figure it out.
It is summer.
You'll be back with us soon. Thank you, Elliot. Elliot Tepper, Carleton University political scientist.